150 of the best Fortnite players in the world are gathering in Germany for one of the biggest tournaments of the year, the FNCS Summit. They'll be competing for a $1.3 million prize pool, and more importantly, the top 15 duos will qualify for the global championship at the end of the year. This is the biggest Fortnite event of the year so far, and today we're breaking down the most dangerous duos and which teams actually have a chance to win it all. But before we talk about the teams, we need to go over the format first, because this LAN is different from anything we've ever seen. A handful of teams actually got disqualified before the last FNCS Grand Finals even started. And Epic eventually reversed those disqualifications, but by then the finals already started and those teams missed out on competing. So rather than just ignoring those teams, they created the second chance qualifiers and adjusted the LAN format to make room by adding a lower bracket and an extra day. So here's how it's all going to work. On day one, the 50 qualified teams from Major 1 will compete in the upper bracket, and they'll have 6 games to make it to the top 25. Those top 25 teams will skip day 2 and advance straight to the grand finals. The bottom 25 teams will drop into the lower bracket, where they'll face off against the teams who qualify through the second chance qualifiers. So day 2 will have the lower bracket compete in 6 games, and every team that gets a victory royale will instantly qualify for grand finals, and then the top 19 teams will qualify as well. Then finally, the 50 qualified teams will play 8 games in the grand finals to decide the Summit LAN champion. Leading up to the grand finals, the biggest story was Peterbot versus Clix. But if you're not entirely tapped into competitive, you probably didn't expect Agers and Rituals to get second place in grand finals. They got just as many eliminations as Peterbot and Pollo, and Agers dealt over 11,000 damage throughout the tournament. But before the Summit, Agers and Rituals are leaving their original drop spot at Sandy Strip to contest Reet and Cooper at Latte Landing. Reet and Cooper only averaged about 2 eliminations per game in the grand finals, placing 11th. But we've seen them win some off-spawn fights against Agers and Ritual in recent tournaments. So we'll have to see if Reet and Cooper are able to defend their spot at LAN. But speaking of Peterbot versus Clix, Clix just announced on Twitter that he's giving up Wonky Land and will be dropping at Squibbly Shore, where Peterbot and Pollo drop. So it does look like we're going to be seeing Clix and Higgs versus Peterbot and Pollo off spawn. Clix and Higgs have a lot of potential, but this duo might be the most frustrating team to watch right now. Not because they're bad, but because everyone knows how good they can be. They've already proven that they can absolutely win in this format in Division Cups, but their problem is consistency, and they're choosing to land on one of the best duos that we've ever seen in all of Fortnite history. At this point, it's not even a debate how good Peter and Pollo are together. Even during tournaments where they don't fully dominate, they still somehow end up near the top with a chance of winning it all. There was a point on day 2 of Grands where Peterbot and Pollo claimed first place for the first time in the tournament, and it felt like they could run away with it. Right after Grands, they placed 3rd in the Division Cup finals with 34 eliminations, including a 13 kill game against some of the best players in NA. If this duo gets momentum early on LAN, they absolutely have a chance of winning the entire event. And if they end up beating Clix and Higgs off spawn, that's going to put Clix and Higgs in the day 2 lower bracket, where they'll have to go up against Mr. Savage and Velo. We'll have to keep a close eye to see what actually happens on the day of the tournament. Then we have Victor V and Canada versus Chino and Pablo. Canada has spent a lot of the season criticizing NA teams. Then after Arc was disqualified, he moved from NA Central to NA West to play with Victor V. And they absolutely dominated. They got the FNCS win on West with 174 points. But a lot of the community is questioning whether any of that will translate to LAN. It is a common joke that retired Fortnite pros go play on NA West for easier wins. Now Canada and Victor V have to prove that they are a legit duo against some of the best players in the world. The problem is, 3rd place duo from Asia will be fighting Victor V and Canada for the east side of Sandy Strip, while Chino and Pablo have the west side uncontested. There's a good chance the team from Asia will leave that POI and Canada will split it with Chino and Pablo, but I doubt things will stay peaceful between them. Chino and Pablo came in 2nd on the grand finals for EU, which is arguably the hardest region in competitive Fortnite, and they've kept up their momentum through recent tournaments as well. Splitting the POI is better for both of them, but from a viewer's perspective, seeing the winners from West compete against the 2nd place duo from EU will be a much more enjoyable watch. Then we have what might be the most high-level matchup in this tournament. Curve and Veno versus Sky and Scroll. The FNCS champions from NA versus the FNCS champions from EU. And similar to the Sandy Strip situation, these teams could end up splitting the north and south side of Battlewood Boulevard. but they do have the opportunity to take each other out, especially if they need a big game to climb up the leaderboard. Veno and Curve absolutely dominated on NA Central. Veno got his multi-regional title winning on EU in the past and now having won on NA. And Curve got a win for controller players, the first FNCS win since 2023. Meanwhile, Sky and Scroll were unstoppable over on EU. 57 eliminations, top 5 placements in almost every single game, and the only EU duo from the 2024 Globals still playing together. This was their first FNCS title. Both teams have won grand finals from the north side of Battlewood Boulevard, but Curve and Veno have moved to the south side of the POI at LAN. With their consistency in the EU Grands, some people consider Sky and Scroll to be the best duo in the world right now. Veno and Curve have been struggling a bit since they moved to EU in preparation for the LAN, so they have a lot to prove. Then we have several incredible teams who don't even have to worry about being contested, starting with Vico and Malabuka. Right after Grands, they instantly won the First Division Cup, and a lot of people have them as favorites heading into this summit. What's interesting is they almost didn't even qualify for Grands because of pressure from Shark and Teeny. Vico and Malabuka were just outside of the top 15 to qualify, and then a team ahead of them got disqualified, giving them the last spot in EU Grand Finals. They went on to place 3rd overall, so they should do well dropping at the north side of Frigid Fortress uncontested. Cold is one of the most naturally talented Fortnite players in the world because somehow this guy barely practices before major tournaments and he still outplaces most other pros. We even saw him air out Courage before the Pro-Am where they practiced a total of 0 minutes together, but this season is different. Rapid and Cold are fully locked in. They've been grinding scrims non-stop, which could make this duo much more dangerous than usual. Cold and Rapid had Dark Dominion unconned in Grands and came in 4th place. Another team set up really well for LAN is Acorn and Bolts. Outside of major POIs, they honestly have one of the best drops on the map. And now they just have to worry about Shark and Teeny at Wonky. Acorn and Bolts are even in a better position than before. What's crazy is if you ignore the 2 games they had terrible zones, their average placement in grand finals was around 6th place. That is extremely consistent. Acorn also won every major 1 FNCS since 2023 until Veno and Curve finally stopped that streak. So expectations for this duo are still extremely high. And then there's Focus and Thomas HD. A lot of people expected them to finish top 3 in the EU Grand Finals, but they dropped on the edge of the map and the zones completely crushed them. They spent an average of 7 minutes in the storm every single game. And even though they're uncontested, their rotation path on LAN is still rough. They could easily run into teams like Veno and Curve or Peterbot and Poyo while rotating across the map. So if the zones continue to pull away from them, this LAN is going to be just as difficult. And we obviously have to talk about Shark and Teeny, because with Clix's announcement, Shark and Teeny now have an uncontested Wonky LAN. This sets them up much better for later in their games, and they won't have to worry about those off-spawn fights. This is Shark's first LAN, and they're another team that really has a solid chance at getting their first FNCS title. Then we have one of the most underrated teams, Javi and Diminished. This duo doesn't get nearly enough attention compared to some of the bigger teams, but they've been insanely consistent all season. They finished above teams like Clix and Higgs, Reet and Cooper, and even Peterbot and Poyo during Grands. And even in their worst games, they still kept up some solid eliminations. They might be one of the most consistent duos in NA right now, but with all the best players competing at LAN, Javi and Diminished might be right on the edge of qualifying for Globals. Then from some of the smaller regions, we have Alex and Reckless from Oceania. Alex is already an 8 times FNCS champion. This duo is showing up to try and put Oceania on the map. The community tends to downplay the tournaments from Oceania, but it's still extremely impressive having the most FNCS wins of all time. They've also been doing well in the Division Cups and the Reload Elite series, so we're going to be seeing Alex at a few LAN tournaments this year. Outside of Wonky LAN, we also have 2 FNCS champion duos, Toyota and Yuma from Asia, and FKS and Hero from the Middle East. Both of these teams could end up third-partying the huge fights happening nearby, but they might get caught in the crossfire if Peterbot and Poyo start pushing north aggressively. And then we have a duo with one of the first simple edit pros who qualified to LAN, 7-Man and Controller. Controller placed 2nd in the Middle East FNCS playing on simple edit. Who would have known that Courage JD could have potentially qualified for LAN? It's going to be exciting to see how they do against some of the highest level players in the world. Now, the lower bracket is also going to be really interesting because several dangerous teams qualified through the second chance qualifiers, starting with Josh and Iamzo. This is legitimately a team that could win the entire event. There's a very good chance they survive the lower bracket and make it to finals. The only question is, where do they decide to land? They've been dropping at Acorn and Bolt's drop spot in recent division cups, so they could be contesting them during grands, but they might end up going somewhere else. Josh and Yamza were expected to get top 5 or even top 3 in grands before they were DQ'd, so we're gonna have to wait and see if they meet those expectations. Then there's Shadow and Virgo. They're currently uncontested in the lower bracket, but if they make it to finals, they could end up contesting Darm and Demas. And after their recent momentum in tournaments, it's definitely a duo people should watch out for. Golden and Ozone are another team that we have to keep an eye on because right now they are uncontested. But if Javi and Aminish fail to make top 25 from the upper bracket, the two teams could end up contesting each other in the lower bracket. Then we have Skittles and Cam. They qualified through the second chance qualifiers, but Skittle has never attended a LAN event even when he has qualified. And apparently he is not planning to show up for this LAN either. Cam already announced that he's replacing Skittles with Aviv. And what makes this duo interesting is that Aviv was picked up by Booga for the second chance qualifier after dropping King. Booga was one of the players that got disqualified right before grands, and unfortunately wasn't able to make it through the second chance qualifiers with Aviv. But Booga's former duo Craze ended up qualifying with King, which means Craze, King, and Aviv are all going to Germany, and Booga is staying home. Then we have Mr. Savage and Velo. Velo just made Fortnite history. He became the first player to ever qualify for an FNCS LAN before even qualifying for an FNCS Grand Finals, which is insane. They're going to be landing at the same spot as Peterbot and Clicks in the lower bracket, but realistically, both Peter and Click should already have qualified directly from day one. Mr. Savage and Velo will probably leave Scribbly Shores after playing in the lower bracket, but there's still a chance they run into each other later in the tournament. And finally, Akira and Kurama. This duo won 3 games in a row during the second chance qualifiers. 3 wins in 6 games puts them in first place by over 50 points. So even though they weren't originally expected at LAN, they're gonna be coming to Germany with a ton of momentum. And speaking of people going to this LAN, I am extremely excited to announce that I will be attending this FNCS LAN. I will be there in Germany, and Epic is actually providing me a streaming booth so I can capture all that content while I'm there. Alongside me, there's going to be other creators and coaches attending as well, like Boop, Faxity, Aussie Antics, Bucky, and even more. You can watch the Summit LAN starting with the upper bracket on Friday, May 29th, and the lower bracket will be on the 30th. And then finally, the grand finals will happen on the 31st. There are so many teams who have a chance to win between the veteran pros and some of the new pros who are attending their very first LAN. This might end up going down as one of the most legendary Fortnite Pro events ever, and I'm excited to watch it all unfold. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.